Rising from the shores of the Bosphorus like a crown between continents, Constantinople was more than a city. It was legend made stone. Founded by Constantine the Great in 330 AD, it was christened as the New Rome, a beacon of power that would outlive its namesake by 1,000 years. But this title, New Rome, sparked a centuries-long question. Who truly inherited the legacy of Rome? Was it the Eastern Empire that carried its laws, language, and emperors? Or was it the Latin West with its papal succession and Charlemagne's claim to a Holy Roman Empire? The Byzantines claimed to be Rome itself, not heirs, but its continuation. Their emperor bore the same title, their court the same ceremonies, their capital its imperial spirit. And for over 1,000 years that claim stood unchallenged. Yet the land it rose upon held mysteries far older than Constantine. Ancient traditions, passed down through the whispers of time, claim that this site once echoed with the footsteps of prophets and kings. Some spoke of it being touched by the legacy of Solomon. Others said its hills and harbours were foretold in both Eastern and Western legends. The Byzantines themselves believed the city's foundation was blessed by visions and celestial signs. And so, Constantine's act of founding the city was not merely political, it was seen as prophetic. The emperor sought not just to create a capital, but to revive the spirit of Rome in a place already charged with sacred history. For emperors, it was a throne. For armies, a prize. And for faiths, a battleground of divine right. Its walls, the mightiest of their age, stood as a challenge to conquerors. Its domes and spires pierced the heavens, home to orthodox rites, imperial decrees, and classical wisdom preserved, while Western Europe descended into medieval shadow. Its geography alone made it a jewel. Commanding the Bosphorus Strait, it sat at the crossroads of Asia and Europe, East and West, Islam and Christendom. Whoever held it controlled the gateway to empires. By the mid-15th century, the city's past glory had dimmed, but its symbolic power had not. Constantinople still stood as the last flicker of the Roman world, guarded fiercely and coveted widely. And on its horizon, a new star was rising from the east, one that would forever change its fate. Capital of the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire for over 1,000 years. It was not merely a city that the armies of Islam desired. It was a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. From the earliest days of the faith, the conquest of Constantinople loomed like a sacred promise. The prophet Muhammad is said to have declared, "Verily, you shall conquer Constantinople. What a wonderful leader will her leader be, and what a wonderful army will that army be." These words echoed across centuries, etched into the hearts of caliphs, sultans, and soldiers alike. But this ambition was more than military. Constantinople represented the gateway between worlds, between empires, between beliefs. To take it was to symbolically unite East and West under the banner of Islam. It was not just strategy, it was destiny. The early Muslims under the Umayyads heard the call. Their fleets reached the city's walls, and companions of the Prophet died on its shores. Among them, Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, who had once welcomed the Prophet into Medina, was buried near the gates. His tomb would become a spiritual rallying point for generations. As centuries passed and attempts failed, the dream never faded. Sufi mystics and scholars kept the vision alive. Among them, Akhshemseddin, a towering spiritual figure of the 15th century, interpreted the hadith not as mere metaphor, but as imminent truth. He whispered it into the ear of a young Mehmed, then a prince, later a sultan, that he was the one foretold. And so the siege of Constantinople was born not only of cannons and tactics, but of prayers, prophecy, and an enduring belief that history could be bent toward divine design. Long before Mehmed II cast his gaze upon Constantinople, the city had already felt the heat of Islamic ambition. The prophecy of its conquest had stirred empires into action, but prophecy does not always yield to the first who pursue it. In the 7th century, the Umayyads were the first to lay siege. Under Caliph Muawiyah, fleets surrounded the city between 674 and 678, launching a years-long campaign. It ended not with victory, but with bitter retreat, beaten back by Greek fire and the sheer endurance of Constantinople's walls. Another Umayyad assault came in 717, this time led by Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik. This too ended in failure, as winter and famine did what swords could not. Yet these attempts carved legends of martyrdom and sacrifice, with companions of the Prophet buried along the city's thresholds. The Abbasids showed less fervour. As the Caliphate's focus shifted east, Constantinople faded from their immediate grasp. Later, the Seljuk Turks and minor Anatolian beyliks flirted with the idea, but none could muster the might or the resolve. Even the Ottomans, for all their early vigour, fell short. Bayezid I, in his blazing campaign westward, encircled the city but never breached it. His momentum died at Ankara, where Timur shattered his armies. Murad II, too, tested the city's walls during moments of truce and opportunity, but always pulled back, restrained by politics, treaties, or divine timing. Each failure etched Constantinople deeper into Islamic memory, not as a lost goal, but as a waiting promise. Each siege, each retreat, fed the fire that would one day forge the final attempt. One last leader, one last army. In the ashes of a shattered Anatolia, one frontier tribe stirred with ambition. From the humble town of Söğüt, the Ottomans rose, first as guardians of borderlands, then as architects of empire. By the late 13th and early 14th centuries, they were just one among many Turkish beyliks scrambling for survival after the fall of the Seljuks and the shadow of Mongol rule. But unlike others, the Ottomans looked westward, toward Byzantine lands. Through cunning diplomacy, marriage alliances, and relentless campaigns, they expanded their reach. Bursa fell. Then Edirne. The Balkans were not just raided, they were settled, governed, absorbed. By the early 15th century, the Ottoman state had outgrown its roots. It was no longer a warrior band. It was a centralized powerhouse with viziers, bureaucracy, and taxation. It had outlasted its rivals and replaced old powers. But Constantinople still stood, taunting them from within their own lands. The conquest of that city would be the keystone of legitimacy. And this dream was not only state policy. It was preached in mosques, sung by dervishes, and whispered in the tents of soldiers. Sufi sheikhs spoke of divine destiny. The Ottoman banner, once a tribal standard, now carried prophecy. It was no longer a matter of if, only when, and who would lead. He was not born to follow tradition. He was born to reshape it. Mehmed, the son of Murad II, entered the world of empire not as its ruler, but as its challenge. His father, Murad II, recognized something in the boy. a restless mind and forceful will that marked him as no ordinary heir. In a move both bold and baffling to his court, Murad abdicated the throne to Mehmed when the boy was just 12 years old. Few could understand it, except perhaps the father who had glimpsed greatness early. Yet the world was not ready. Crusading forces threatened the realm, and the young sultan's grip was too green. When crisis loomed, Mehmed did not cling to pride. Instead, he sent an iconic message to his retired father. "If you are still the Sultan, come and rule. But if I am the Sultan, then I command you to take up your sword and rule." During his first reign, he was merely 12 years old. Yet even then, he obsessed over Constantinople. He ordered maps, questioned generals, and pressed for assaults that his advisors barely understood. It was too soon. He was too young. The throne passed back to his father, but the fire never left. When Mehmed returned as Sultan in 1451, he was no longer a boy. He had read Aristotle and the Quran, studied Alexander and the Prophet. He spoke Arabic, Persian, Greek, Latin, and Turkish. He absorbed Renaissance thought while mastering Islamic theology. He was as much a philosopher as a warrior. But above all, he was obsessed. He saw in Constantinople not just a city, but a destiny. He did not want to be just another sultan. He wanted to be the one the prophet had foretold. His court feared his ambition. His advisors warned against provocation. But Mehmed ignored them. His mentor, Akshemseddin, a mystic scholar, whispered prophecy into his ear and reminded him the time was now. And so Mehmed prepared, not recklessly, but relentlessly. He was calm, calculating, and cold when needed. A ruler of vision, but also of ruthless clarity. He would be remembered not just as a conqueror of walls, but as a shaper of worlds. By the mid-15th century, Constantinople stood as a fading shadow of its former glory. Once the heart of an empire that spanned continents, it had become a shrinking island in an Ottoman sea. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, noble and resolute, ruled a city of hollow churches, cracked marbles, and dwindling faith. The Byzantine Empire, in truth, was no empire at all. Its territory barely extended beyond its walls. Its economy was broken, its population a fraction of what it once was, and its politics paralyzed by centuries of internal strife. Yet the city's spiritual prestige remained unbroken, still the seat of Orthodox Christianity, still a beacon to the Christian East. Constantine XI turned westward for help, to the Pope, to Venice, to Genoa. In desperation, the unthinkable was agreed, a union of the Eastern and Western churches. The price of survival was submission to Rome. But the union was bitter. Most of the city's citizens and clergy rejected it, and the West responded half-heartedly. A few ships came, a few mercenaries, and one man of legend, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, a Genoese commander with iron will and 1,000 men. He would be the backbone of the city's defense. Venice and Genoa, rivals by trade and by tradition, weighed their options cautiously. They offered just enough to protect their interests, but not enough to provoke Ottoman wrath. Hungary and the northern powers watched, but acted not. As the siege neared, Constantinople found itself spiritually isolated and diplomatically betrayed. Surrounded by an empire that had outgrown it, the city stood not because of what it had, but because of what it symbolized. The last Rome, the last hope, and those who came to defend it did so not for Byzantium, but for the myth of what it once was.